This is Power Hour with Gabriella Power.
Hello and welcome to Power Hour. I'm Gabriella Power. Thank you for joining us. President Trump has unleashed on Europe at the World Economic Forum in Davos, warning that bad things will happen if Europe doesn't change when it comes to immigration and energy.
Europe and the UK, sir. Why?
No, I'm not, but they have to change their ways or they're going to...
Why? Trade with your allies makes no sense.
Between immigration and energy, if they don't change, bad things will happen to them.
What's your plan?
And we all know the problems that Europe is facing when it comes to immigration, and it's only getting worse in the UK. We'll be crossing to London later in the show as the UK reaches another grim milestone with almost 66,000 asylum seekers arriving since Keir Starmer has been in power. So that's in the space of just 19 months. But let's go back to Donald Trump and his speech, and let's listen to what he had to say about energy, really making the case against wind farms.
The more windmills a country has, the more money that country loses and the worse that country is doing. China makes almost all of the windmills, and yet I haven't been able to find any wind farms in China. Did you ever think of that? It's a good way of looking at it. They're smart. China's very smart. They make them, they sell them for a fortune. They sell them to the stupid people that buy them, but they don't use them themselves. They put up a couple of big wind farms, but they don't use them. They just put them up to show people what they could look like. They don't spin. They don't do anything. They use a thing called coal, mostly.
He doesn't hold back, does he? He really has a way with words. But of course, the top story today is that Donald Trump has ruled out force to acquire Greenland. Let's listen.
We never asked for anything, and we never got anything. We probably won't get anything unless I decide to use excessive strength and force where we would be, frankly, unstoppable. But I won't do that. Okay? Now everyone's saying, oh, good. That's probably the biggest statement I made, because people thought I would use force. I don't have to use force. I don't want to use force. I won't use force.
Look, I said earlier in the week on this issue of Trump and Greenland that there's often a method to the madness. We've seen this with Trump plenty of times before, making wild demands. People don't know whether to take him seriously or not, but he often makes these bold starting points for negotiations and making a deal, and then he uses leverage to get what he ultimately wants, which is often something more reasonable. Now, the president has dropped his tariff threat on 8 European nations. It was scheduled to take place from February 1. And Donald Trump says that he's now formed a framework of a future deal with NATO. He wrote on Truth Social, based upon a very productive meeting that I have had with the Secretary General of NATO, Mark Rutte, we have formed the framework of a future deal with respect to Greenland and, in fact, the entire Arctic region. Now, he said that if the deal is finalised, it will be a great one for the United States of America and all NATO nations. And Trump added that talks are continuing, saying that additional discussions are being held concerning the Golden Dome as it pertains to Greenland. And he said that Vice President J.D. Vance, Secretary of State Marco Rubio and Special Envoy Steve Witkoff will be leading negotiations and reporting directly to him. We also heard from NATO Secretary General Mark Rutte at Davos ahead of this Truth Social post from Donald Trump, who said that Donald Trump and other leaders are right, that we do have to do more to defend the Arctic as China and Russia are increasingly active.
To the Arctic, I think President Trump is right. Other leaders in NATO are right. We need to defend the Arctic. We know that these sea lanes are opening up. We know that China and Russia are increasingly active in the Arctic. There are 8 countries bordering on the Arctic. 7 are a member of NATO. That's Finland and Sweden and Norway and Denmark, Iceland, Canada and the US. And there's only 1 country bordering on the Arctic outside NATO, and that's Russia. And I would argue there is a 9th country, which is China, which is increasingly active in the Arctic region. So President Trump and other leaders are right. We have to do more there. We have to protect the Arctic against Russian and Chinese influence. And that's exactly what NATO ambassadors decided to do in September. We are working on that, making sure that collectively we will defend the Arctic region.
Joining us now is John Hinderaker, President of the Centre of the American Experiment, and Josh Hammer, Senior Editor-at-Large at Newsweek. Thank you both for joining us. I really appreciate it, and Happy New Year to you both. Let's start with the news out of Davos, with President Trump, first of all, ruling out force to take Greenland, and now he says that a framework of a future deal has been reached with NATO over Greenland. Look, he certainly moves quickly. John, is it the art of the deal? What do you make of this?
Well, first of all, Gabriella, there was never any possibility of our invading Greenland, just like there was never any possibility of our annexing Canada. I don't know why Trump likes to talk that way sometimes, but that was not in the cards. On the other hand, it's always been clear that Denmark and Greenland are happy to let us have whatever we need in terms of bases and armaments in Greenland. They don't want Russian missiles passing overhead any more than we do. So this is all going to get worked out. I think at the end of the day, this is not going to be a big problem to solve.
Josh, what are your thoughts? We also heard today from NATO Secretary General Mark Rutte saying that Donald Trump is right, and so are other world leaders, that more needs to be done to protect the Arctic. And I also want to get your thoughts on Donald Trump unleashing on Europe again when it comes to energy and immigration.
Yeah, there's a lot to bash Europe with these days, Gabriella. This goes all the way back, at least as far as J.D. Vance's speech at the Munich Security Forum in Germany last February, and in the very first weeks of this administration. So this administration is definitely not afraid to yuck it up with Europe and to criticize them pretty harshly when need be. By the way, they're also perfectly happy to make nice with Europe when it's suitable for the American national interest as well. I think back to the summit at the White House in August when they were trying to kind of orchestrate this Zelensky-Putin peace deal. But in any event there, look, I'm not sure that ideal really has been reached. I take Donald Trump seriously, but not literally here in this announcement on his Truth Social post. I think that there's probably been some positive discussions there. My best guess, Donald Trump pays very close attention to the stock market. He's known for watching the stocks very, very closely. I think that he was probably spooked a little bit by the mini crash that happened after the threat of tariffs against Denmark and perhaps the UK, France, various other Western European countries there. So he's probably trying to in the very short term stop the economic bleeding. I don't think he's giving up at all, frankly, when it comes to this American desire to acquire Greenland, a campaign, by the way, that I find myself fully supportive of. There's actually a very long history of American statesmen expressing interest in actually making deals to acquire Greenland. William Seward, Abraham Lincoln's Secretary of State, explored it back in 1867, 2 years after Lincoln's assassination. Harry Truman made a formal offer of $100 million in 1946 at the very beginning of the Cold War because he saw it as a very strategic island when it comes to deterring Russian and, by extension, Chinese incursion into the Western Hemisphere. So especially given this resurgent Trumpian interest in the Monroe Doctrine, this notion of Western Hemispheric dominance, that I think it plays really nicely into that. So I would definitely not discount the possibility that Donald Trump actually ends up getting Greenland. In fact, I think that there's a real chance, frankly, before this term is up, that you could see potentially, I'm not calling it, but as in potentially, you could see Greenland as the next Guam, Puerto Rico, Virgin Islands, some sort of territorial acquisition.
John, what do you make of that?
Well, I don't disagree. It's certainly possible. I guess my point is we don't really need that. We're going to get all the security cooperation that we want from Denmark and Greenland. And if in addition to that, we want Greenland to be a territory, frankly, we can buy it. There's only about 55,000 people living in Greenland. And I think it would be within our means to acquire Greenland if that's what we really want to do. But I think the important thing is that we have the ability to do what we need to do there in terms of national and international security.
Okay, let's turn to Minnesota. And of course, we've been seeing the anti-ICE riots. Anti-ICE protesters have been taken to the streets and then over the weekend storming a church. Vice President J.D. Vance is reportedly going to be visiting Minnesota on Thursday, but this is what Donald Trump had to say about the protests against ICE.
Screaming, shame, shame. This is not people that are like living in Minnesota. These are professional, paid people. They're like actors. I mean, I watched the guy last night in the church. He was, and not just Don Lemon. Don Lemon's a loser. But I watched the guy last night in the church. This guy's a professional guy, and he actually admits to it. He gets paid a lot of money to go and cause trouble. And you see that. What they don't see is that ICE gets rid of murderers,
drug dealers, Tren de Aragua, I mean, the worst gang in the world, anywhere in the world, MS-13, Tren. But these are the worst gangs, and they get rid of them. They take them out.
John, you're in Minnesota. Can you talk to us about what it's been like on the ground?
Well, it's been terrible, Gabriella. There have been constant conflicts between these so-called protesters who are actively interfering with ICE, trying to prevent them from being able to carry out their law enforcement function, and the ICE people who are getting no help at all from local law enforcement, no crowd control, no help at all. And meanwhile, our elected officials, starting with Governor Tim Walz, are encouraging and inciting these rioters to interfere with the enforcement of federal law, which of course is a crime. And so it's really a very tough situation here on the ground. And it was made worse, of course, by the incident in which Renee Good got shot as she was driving into an ACE agent.
Josh, I want to get your thoughts on this and also what role the media is playing. It's been revealed that ABC, NBC, and CBS delivered 93% negative coverage on ICE. This is after the fatal shooting of Renee Good, and according to a study from the Media Research Centre, but 93% negative coverage. I mean, that has to have such a big impact.
You know, it has a tremendous impact, Gabriella. I think the silver lining, though, is that it's not as tremendous an impact as it would have been as recently as just 10, 15 years ago. I mean, the Trump administration, to their great credit, I mean, back before there was the Trump administration, there was the Trump-Vance campaign, they intuited quite presciently that the American media ecosystem today is not necessarily dominated by the big three networks of ABC, NBC, and CBS. In fact, if you look at the airtime that the Trump-Vance campaign gave to top 100, top 500 podcasts, YouTube shows, alternative media, digital media, they totally blew the Harris-Walz campaign out of the water. And Caroline Levitt, the press secretary, actually now has this whole alternative new media section in the press conferences there. So they're very astute and very tuned into that. Having said that, obviously, I mean, that the number is not particularly helpful. You know, these analogies to ICE are just so utterly astounding to me. I mean, putting on my legal cap as a lawyer here, ICE is just a law enforcement agency. It is just a federal law enforcement agency that is tasked with enforcing a specific body of federal law, that being immigration law. I mean, to that extent, though, it's really no different than the FBI. I mean, the FBI is also a federal law enforcement agency. There's any number of federal law enforcement agencies there. But you know, when I hear these elected Democrats, Keith Ellison, the Attorney General of Minnesota, is a very good example. I was watching his press conference maybe about a week and a half ago, where he was kind of summarizing his new lawsuits that the state of Minnesota and Jacob Fry, the mayor of Minneapolis, they're suing DHS, they're suing ICE for ICE presence there. And his rhetoric was just totally striking to me, Gabrielle. He was saying it is our states' rights. It is our 10th Amendment issue. The federal government cannot belong here. And I found myself thinking, wow, I mean, do that in a thick Southern accent, like the states' rights, the federal government does not belong here. I mean, we're talking about the ghost of John C. Calhoun. We're talking about the ghost of the Confederacy. And frankly, the ghost of the Confederacy lives on. I mean, back then it was a Democrat insurrection that led to the Civil War. And frankly, these so-called sanctuary cities are actually just neo-Confederate bastion state. The solution back then, well, God willing, won't take actual conflict, but the legal solution is to establish the supremacy of federal law, which is already established part of Article 6 of the Constitution there. And thankfully, I think we have a commander-in-chief who understands that very important norm.
Oh, absolutely. Staying in Minnesota, Donald Trump has slammed Ilhan Omar, weighing into the mounting questions over her net worth. Of course, her net worth reportedly jumped $30 million pretty quickly. This is what Donald Trump had to say.
Australia is not even a country. They don't have anything that resembles a country. And if it is a country, it's considered just about the worst in the world. They come here and they become rich and they don't have a job. I was told that Ilhan Omar is worth $30 million. She never had a job. She's a crooked congressman.
John, what's your take on all of this?
Well, first of all, by her own filings, her own reports, Ilhan Omar has gone in a year from having a net worth of essentially zero to having a net worth of $30 million. Now, that is not easy to do. And it's especially not easy to do when her husband doesn't seem to have any active or successful businesses that might explain it. And so it obviously raises questions. And another thing that is calling out for investigation is that it was Ilhan Omar who introduced the free food legislation that enabled the Feeding Our Future fraud, the Feeding Our Future scandal, which adds up now to about $500 million and was centered in the Somalian community. So a lot of people are wondering whether some of that $500 million might have wound up with Ilhan Omar. I have no idea whether that's the case or not, but certainly her sudden wealth is worth looking into.
Oh, of course. Now, I want to turn to Iran because, of course, over the past few weeks, we have just seen extraordinary scenes of courage from the people of Iran and also so much devastation. I mean, the scale of the violence deployed by Iran's security forces against protesters has been staggering. Thousands of people have been killed since demonstrations began, many others detained, tortured. Josh, what are your thoughts on where to from here? What do you expect will happen in the future? Do you think it's inevitable that the regime will fall?
Well, the first thing to note is, I mean, just the staggering degree of just human carnage. I mean, we don't know the exact number of deaths, but at this point, Iranian state television. I mean, so that's the lowest possible estimate. They're now saying about 3.5 to 4,000. I mean, most estimates now have it at least 20, 25,000, possibly more than that. And that's horrific. I mean, you're talking here about a government murdering its own people for having the temerity, for having the chutzpah to say that actually our economy is terrible. There is a water drought. Our currency is losing value relative to the dollar and other Western currencies there. We just want to drink water. We want to eat food. We want to not starve. Stop spending money on these foreign terrorist organizations. Stop funding Hezbollah in Lebanon. Stop funding the Houthis in Yemen and on and on and on there. This particular uprising was really sparked not by concerns about the hijab or anything. That was a 2022 protest. This was really an economic protest. And a regime that murders potentially upwards of 25, God knows how many, 30, who knows how many thousands of its own citizens because of a desire to want the government to provide for their economic needs. It's just staggering about the degree of evil. Now, is the regime going to fall? Look, they've been around now for over 4.5 decades. They took power in the revolution in 1979. They have been through these sorts of uprisings before. This is arguably the most severe uprising that they faced in their 4.5 decades, at least going back to 2009, the so-called Green Revolution that Barack Obama did very little, if anything, to support at the time. I will say, Gabriella, I think that President Trump has a red line to fulfill at this point there. I'm not a big fan of red lines. My foreign policy is very much in accord with President Teddy Roosevelt, who famously said, speak softly and carry a big stick. That's my preference. But Donald Trump drew a red line pretty clearly, actually, multiple times on Truth Social. He said, keep on going. Help is on the way. We will not tolerate the regime slaughtering its own citizens. Well, I hate to be the bearer of bad news, but that red line has been crossed. It's been eviscerated, trampled over. And the question now, ultimately, is that red line going to be enforced? And Trump is now getting a lot of advice. He's getting a lot of possible plans presented, tossed his way from his close military advisors, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs, et cetera, et cetera. We'll see what he does there. And I don't pretend to know exactly what some sort of response would look like there. But at this point, if for American deterrence, if nothing else, to say nothing of trying to inflict damage on this most cancerous of regimes there, I think some sort of American response really is required.
John, what do you make of that? Do you think that Donald Trump should take action?
I agree with absolutely everything that Josh just said. I think that this regime is horrible. It's evil. It has long overstayed its welcome. But history tells us that the worst tyrannical regimes often survive longer than you ever think that they could. And if they're willing to gun down citizens in the street, they can stay in power for a long time. So I hope that the administration finds an effective way to get its thumb on the scale on behalf of the people of Iran and help to bring about the destruction of the mullah's regime.
Absolutely. Look, before I let you go, I just want to bring you President Trump's comments on Marco Rubio. He said that Marco Rubio will be going down as the greatest Secretary of State in United States history. Let's listen.
That the Democrats probably wish they didn't do that. And Marco has been fantastic. Marco, stand up, please. You have done a great job as Secretary of State. He's going to go down as the best Secretary of State. And Scott, and we have Susie, who's the first female chief of staff, and she's the best chief of staff, too.
We've been seeing a lot of Marco Rubio on our screens, and you can really see how much confidence Donald Trump has in him. Josh, what's your assessment of Marco Rubio?
I think Marco Rubio has had a historic first year as Secretary of State. I mean, the sheer number of peace deals that America has orchestrated across the world, everywhere from Thailand and Cambodia to India and Pakistan to Rwanda and the Congo, Armenia and Azerbaijan, the Middle East. I mean, basically everywhere they go, they're getting more peace deals. And then you kind of couple that with some of these staggering operations. I mean, the Nicolas Maduro operation, which everyone recognizes was the brainchild of Marco Rubio, this was staggering. I mean, this was an incredible reassertion of American Western Hemispheric dominance. So I think Marco Rubio is absolutely soaring right now. I mean, he's already the first man to serve as both Secretary of State and National Security Advisor since Henry Kissinger famously served both those roles there. Look, if I were a betting man, which I'm really not, but if I were a betting man, I would be long on Marco Rubio for the 2028 Republican presidential nomination. I'm not predicting that. I think JD Vance is still the favorite right now, but it seems to me that Vice President Vance is somewhat stagnating at a moment where Marco Rubio is profoundly ascendant. And don't discount the possibility that maybe, just maybe, Trump could actually potentially endorse Rubio. I mean, most recently, he's been talking about JD as his anointed successor. But I mean, you said it, Gabrielle. Trump clearly loves Marco Rubio and clearly has a ton of trust in this guy there. So we'll see. It could get very interesting.
Look, I wouldn't be surprised if he endorsed Marco Rubio either. John, what do you think?
Well, I think we have to wait until Trump's term is over and let a little time go by to see what the cumulative effect of all these foreign policies turns out to be. We'll leave that to the historians, but I agree that Marco Rubio is doing a terrific job. I know Marco a little. I've worked with him. I think he is extraordinarily competent and a genuinely good guy. Everyone who knows Marco likes him, and I think he does a great job of representing our country.
John Hinderaker, President of the Center of the American Experiment, and Josh Hammer, Senior Editor at Large at Newsweek. Thank you both so much for joining us.
Thank you, Gabrielle.
Joining us now from London is writer and broadcaster Esther Kraku. Esther, it's great to see you again. There's certainly a lot happening in the UK. Let's start with Keir Starmer. Prime Minister Keir Starmer, his net favourability rating is his lowest to date and his joint lowest recorded by YouGov of any Prime Minister other than Liz Truss. So just 1 in 6 Britons have a favourable opinion of Keir Starmer. I wonder who they are, and there's certainly no signs of that turning around anytime soon. But Esther, this comes amid further reports of his disastrous handling of immigration. GB News is reporting that more than 65,000 asylum seekers have arrived in Britain from France during Keir Starmer's first 19 months in power. So this has surpassed Boris Johnson's 65,000 figure in almost half the amount of time. So Esther, no wonder popularity is not improving, and there certainly must be a lot of anger about this over in the UK.
Yeah, I mean, Keir Starmer's premiership has been like watching a very unfunny parody of what a prime minister should actually be. I mean, this is a man whose government has managed to rack up a dozen U-turn and broken election promises in just over the year that he's actually been prime minister and Labour has been in power. But on the small boats and immigration front, I think that's probably where he loses the most credibility, insofar as he had any credibility to begin with, because he explicitly campaigned on the adults being back in the room. He cancelled the Rwanda policy on day one, which was actually in many ways based on what the Australian policy was. And to even speak to the heart of that, the Conservative government hired Australian consultants to consult Britain to deal with this particular issue. He cancelled it on day one, squandered all the money that had been spent already and invested in it, and said he will get a handle on this. And the fact that clearly his slogan of smashing the boats probably meant something else than actually stopping them has shown that the government has lost complete and total control over this chaos. And this week in particular has made it even more ridiculous, because while he's talking about the self-determination of Greenlanders and, you know, European countries have sent a combined total force of, wait for it, 37 soldiers to defend Greenland from Donald Trump. You know, he's talking about the self-determination of these people, and he can't even defend the British coast
Oh.
from a bunch of dinghies crossing the channel. I mean, it's beyond ridiculous.
Yeah, it's such a joke. It's interesting, though, looking at the polls, that it seems that Nigel Farage has slipped, recording his lowest net favourability rating since April last year. I want to get your thoughts on why that might be, with several MPs moving from the Conservative Party to Reform. What does this mean for the future of Reform and also the future of the Conservative Party?
Yes, I mean, it is quite concerning, but it's come off the back of, high-profile conservatives like Robert Jenrick defecting to the Reform Party. And I think many core Reform voters are thinking, is the Reform Party going to be Tory light? One of the things that made them so popular out of the gate was the fact that, they are not the Conservative Party, which has basically put Britain through 14 years of complete incompetence. But at the same time, the practicality of governance means you need failed Tories to learn how to not fail. And this is something that the Trump administration has shown. His first term in power, he was basically fighting against forces that he didn't know existed. And in his second term, a year in, he's really got his ducks in a row in terms of what he wants to do. And I think Nigel Farage is recognizing that reality. They have put a deadline on when they will accept Tory defectors. I believe it's on May 7th, when the local elections are going to be up, and we're anticipating a very, very bloody nose for the Labour Party across Scotland and Wales. But yes, it's understandable to see why people are jittery about this sort of thing, because people don't want the Tories and they don't want to see it reincarnated in Reform.
Let's go to the biggest British family drama since Megxit. Brooklyn Beckham has released this explosive statement this week saying that he doesn't want to reconcile with his parents. Let's go through part of the statement. Part of it says that I've been silent for years and made every effort to keep these matters private. He accused his mum of not following through with the wedding dress for Nicola, his wife, and also accused his mum of humiliating him during the wedding with a dance. He writes, "My mum hijacked my first dance with my wife, which had been planned weeks in advance, to a romantic song." And he said, in front of our 500 wedding guests, Mark Anthony called me to the stage where in the schedule was planned to be my romantic dance with my wife, but instead my mum was waiting to dance with me, and she danced very inappropriately on me in front of everyone. I've never felt more uncomfortable or humiliated in my life. What a statement there. Now, of course, David Beckham has broken his silence over this, saying that children are allowed to make mistakes. Of course, this statement from Brooklyn is wild. It goes without saying, it's always sad when family problems are aired publicly. The statement seems very Meghan Markle, but I do have to say, Esther, some of the takes on the internet that I've been seeing have been pretty funny, of people just mocking the whole thing. Here's one of them. Esther, can we blame Victoria? She just wants to dance.
Yeah, girls just want to have fun, as I'm sure inspired this. Look, this whole Beckham saga is kind of giving like a Temu version of Harry and Meghan, with the whole, my family doesn't like my wife. Now, if anyone is familiar, particularly Brits are familiar with the brand Posh and Becks, we know above everything else that you can assume about that couple, they will do anything for a few quid and to maintain their reputation. I remember doing a show on Channel 4 where, there were representatives of LGBTQ organizations in the UK that were outraged that David Beckham had decided to provide commentary at the Qatar World Cup, even though Qatar explicitly bans homosexuality. And, I said, why is anyone surprised? They are loyal to Team Becks and Posh, and they want to make money where they can. And so I can understand Brooklyn's assertion that, the family brand comes first. We obviously know that David Beckham has in private had meltdowns over the fact that he hasn't been knighted by the royal family. That being said, I don't have enough sympathy in the day to allocate some for Brooklyn Beckham. This is a once failed amateur photographer, grew up very privileged. He also decided to try his hand at cooking professionally, and at one point recommended to his followers to cook pasta with seawater, which I'm sure no one wants chocolate-flavored algae in their pasta. So this is someone that, has been trying to figure out life on the backdrop of, having fabulously wealthy parents. And while I do sympathize with him, I just think he should probably have taken the high road. Like I would say with Harry, just keep silent, because no one has a lot of sympathy for the kids of wildly multimillionaires and now the husband of someone whose family is worth, I believe, in the billions of dollars.
It's extraordinary, isn't it? And it will be interesting to see how much brand damage this does do to the Beckham's brand. We'll wait and see. Now, Prince Harry is in London for his lawsuit against Associated Newspapers. And Esther, he was reportedly fighting back tears while he was speaking about his wife, Meghan Markle. He was emotional, telling London's High Court that the Daily Mail made Meghan's life an absolute misery. What more can you tell us about this?
Yeah, so this was quite an interesting show of kind of like emotional instability. He was quite like emotionally unstable the whole time, very quite emotional. He actually got into a few sort of rows with the judge, and at some point the judge said, actually multiple times, that he shouldn't burden himself by trying to do his job. And he talked about journalists that work for the Daily Mail that basically made their career out of invading his privacy, which is obviously a faux pas. Only he can invade his privacy and that of his family, apparently. And he ended his kind of spiel with the fact that the Daily Mail had made his wife's life a misery, which is when he really got emotional. So you can tell a big part of this is driven by his need to feel like he's defending his wife. Now, of course, people would think, actually, are you so concerned about privacy? Of course, no one should phone tap anyone and invade their privacy in that way. But this is also someone who wrote an execrable book, as described by many, about his family and invaded many people's privacy without their permission. So it's kind of hard to be completely neutral on this. On the one side, you can understand Prince Harry's need for privacy and also to fight what he sees as a grave injustice. But on the other hand, apparently it's okay when he plays the game because he feels morally justified.
Always. Isn't it interesting? Esther Kraku, writer and broadcaster, thank you so much for joining us. And that is Power Hour. Thank you for your company. We'll see you next week. Make sure you subscribe to Sky News Australia on YouTube.